A bad runway is a lot like a draw 2 card in Uno. Technically, you can't stack the draw 2 card on top of another draw 2 card in Uno. And technically, the runway is supposed to matter. But we've gotten to the point in Drag Race history where you can win in some of the worst looks imaginable. And that's what today's video is all about. Welcome to Wild Spear. Today we'll be talking about 5 times that a queen won the challenge in the worst runway look of the week. I'm not talking about just bad runways here. I'm talking about times when the queen who won the maxi challenge had a runway that was by far the worst of the week. The runway that inspired this video is of course the now iconic Bob the Drag Queen Amazon robot bodysuit for the Roller Girl runway. This is a look that is so bad, fans still talk about it and bring it up to Bob in her meet and greets. For this week's challenge, the queens had to compete in Ruko's Empire, where they parodied the drama Empire. Bob did amazing in the challenge, but then she rolled out on the runway in the Roller Girl robot bodysuit. I know people are going to talk about how bad this runway was, but was it the worst of the week? This week's runway also featured the Nike shorts incident from Cynthia Lee Fontaine. Which of these runways was worse? The Amazon bodysuit or gym shorts? And although Nike can be expensive and Cynthia probably paid more for her look than Bob simply because it was Nike, her look was probably worse than Bob's because what did it have to do with the rest of her look? Why was she wearing this? At the end of the day, I wouldn't put Bob on this list simply because Cynthia exists. Instead, I want to start off with an honorable mention sort of queen. On season 7, we had one of the most confusing but still fun runways in Drag Race history, the ugliest dress runway. This runway was paired with the challenge Divine Inspiration, where the queens had to recreate some of John Waters' greatest films. This gave us Ginger's amazing performance in Eggs, and probably one of the ugliest dresses ever worn on the runway, with Ginger's green dress. This runway was confusing, at least for me, because it wasn't clear whether the queens wanted to create something that was just so ugly, or they wanted something that they turned from ugly to couture. It seems that at the end of the day, the queens that went with an ugly look over the ugly and make it fashionable look were treated better by the judges. And Ginger's look was by far the ugliest. I don't know why the queens didn't just go over to Goodwill and pick up whatever they could find, because that would have fit the bill for this challenge. This one, of course, doesn't really count because the goal of the challenge was to be an ugly dress, and yeah, Ginger did that. But I still wanted to call it out because holy crap, this is ugly. And this was an ugly dress. Think about what she wore for All-Star 6. That one was planned. And just because I wanted to haunt your dreams, I wanted to just leave this one right here. To start off with the actual list, I think it's important to think about what the challenge is before we talk about the runway. Some challenges are so iconic that they just completely outweigh what the runway was for that week. You'll remember the winner of a Rusical or a Snatch Game much more for their performance there than what they wore on the runway. And a queen who has an amazing Snatch Game can sometimes have a forgiven runway. But if it's just some sort of random acting challenge or advertising challenge, the runway seems to come into play much more. None of this is more apparent than Jinx Monsoon's runway the week that she won the Snatch Game as Little Edie. Although Roxy and Alaska had great Snatch Games, can you imagine either of them winning over Jinx for the Snatch Game? If the runway had been taken into account, either of these queens could have won the challenge. For this week, the runway, the queens had to present the deadliest Snatch glamour look. As far as confusing runway categories go, I think this one fits the bill because some of these queens included fish in their runway, like Alaska and Ivy Winters, while others just put on a nice dress. For some reason, Coco dressed up as Nicki Minaj from the Super Bass music video too, and maybe she explained why, but really, I don't understand. And with the confusing runway category in mind, I'm not going to fault some of the queens for taking it in a bunch of different directions because it wasn't clear. Jinx definitely did not go the fish route. Instead, she just presented a dress that probably could have been worn by my grandmother. But this is something that probably Blanche Devereaux might have worn on the Golden Girls if she decided she wanted to wear a brighter color, maybe. After her amazing Snatch Game, it didn't matter how bad this look was or how busted her makeup looked that week. She was always going to win for her little Edie. Moving back a couple of seasons, it's sometimes hard to judge the early seasons because it was a very different world. For the second season of Drag Race, the queens were still figuring out what was expected of them on the runway. One of the queens who was a little bit unsure of that was Tatiana, who from the very first episode was a bit timid on that runway. As time went on, she was able to find her groove and eventually won the very first Snatch Game in Drag Race history. She won, of course, for her iconic Britney Spears performance, but her runway was a bit of a choice. The runway for that week was Your Personal Style, which was meant to showcase what these queens would look like in drag if you saw them at a club or a bar. Tatiana being Tatiana, she wore a purple tube dress and a black wig. And it's hard to fault her for this look because it probably is what she would have worn if you had seen her back in those early days. But if you put her against some of the other queens like Jessica Wilde, Jujubee, and Tyra Sanchez, Tatiana's look is the most basic of the week. It helped that her biggest competition in the Snatch Game, Pandora Box, also had a pretty basic runway, but standing next to Tati clearly had the worst look of the week. But again, these were the early days of Drag Race, so a tube dress was just fine. And it was just fine with Tatiana's Snatch Game. Keeping with the theme of Snatch Game, the season 14 Snatch Game really only had one queen who could have plausibly won that challenge, and that was Deja Skye. Although I think they edited the Snatch Game to be a little bit worse than it actually was, and they probably could have found a couple queens to be safe from that challenge, Deja was the clear winner and was the only one who really got any laughs on that Snatch Game. So, for that reason, she was given the win regardless of what her runway was. I know I talked about confusing runway categories with the Season 5 Snatch Game runway, but this runway category, Holy Couture, that was paired with this Snatch Game, was also very confusing. From what I've read online, the queens were actually given the prompt, "What do you worship?" which is why we got some strange categories here for Holy, like Willow Pill's mushroom look, but Deja decided to go with a Joan of Arc style look. Unfortunately, Deja's look was not very well constructed, at least it didn't appear so on the runway. The shoulders and neck piece looked like they were just made out of cardboard, while the dress itself looked like it was just a piece of fabric. And don't get me started on that wig. Well, I guess it would have fit for the Middle Ages with the way that people's hair looked, but it just didn't match what we expect for Drag Race's main stage. But at the end of the day, she was the only one who could have won that Snatch Game, even though her look was the worst of the week when you look at the other queens. And I know we'd seen this look from Bosco before, but still, compare it to what we've seen from Deja, this was not the move. This was the worst look of the week. The last two here that I want to talk about aren't necessarily awful looks, they just didn't meet the runway category. In a week when every other queen had a look that at least checked the box that yes, this fits, these queens did not fit the brief. And yes, I did say brief. The first one of these has been talked about to death, and that's Alaska on her 2-in-1 runway. On All Stars, for this challenge, the queens had to act in parodies of famous movies. That would be Showgirls, and the one that Alaska was in was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Alaska gave a show-stopping performance in what might be the best acting performance in Drag Race history. It's just too bad that her runway did not match the category. This is one of the first times in Drag Race history where the queens were expected to have a reveal on the runway. They were supposed to come out in one look and have it transformed into a different look. All the other queens came out with some attempt of a first look before revealing into a second look. Yes, I know Alyssa's look was not the best, At least the first rotten Hershey Kiss look was technically a dress. Alaska, on the other hand, came out in a garbage bag that completely covered her face until revealing the fact that she was Lil Poundcake. If you don't remember Lil Poundcake, she was the character that her and Linacia Sparks came up with on Season 5 of Drag Race for that one mini challenge. I don't know if the judges were just scared of not giving Lil Poundcake the win because look at that face. Look at her while we see Fifi voting. But at the end, Alaska's runway did not match the category. And if that means anything on Drag Race, it means that maybe she shouldn't have won the challenge. And while Alaska's runway has been talked to death, I do want to talk about Canada's Drag Race Season 1. As confusingly judged as Drag Race Season 1 was, the runway was all over the place. Sometimes the runway could cost a queen the win, while other times it didn't even matter. Sometimes those two things could happen in the same challenge. For the 6th episode of Season 1, Star 69, the queens had to come up with and write and produce commercials for a late-night drag law firm. This challenge is mostly known for Jimbo's "It's my special day." That was rough, but you get the idea. The runway that went with this challenge was the denim on denim on denim runway. No, not that denim, who's also conveniently Canadian. Denim, the material. As amazing as Jimbo was in the challenge, her runway was equally amazing. It may have been the best runway of the season. Jimbo had the best performance in the challenge and the best runway. But it didn't matter because the judges wanted to crown somebody else, and that was Rita Baga. Rita came out wearing something that Pink probably would have worn around maybe 2008 in her career, and it looked fine. The problem was it wasn't made out of denim. It was a denim-like material, but it wasn't denim. This challenge is especially crazy because the queen who was the second best in the entire challenge was dropped into the low position because her runway was bad. Not because it wasn't denim, but because it was bad. Lemon had a great performance in the challenge with her partner Priyanka, but her runway was so bad that the judges decided to drop her into the low position this week. Rita, who had an okay performance in the main challenge, didn't have denim on her runway, and she won the challenge. Where is the consistency here, Canada? I guess you found your way as time has gone on, but let's be real, Season 1, the runways mattered when they wanted them to matter. And unfortunately, for this week, the queen who won the challenge had the worst runway of the week. Those were 5 times that, in my opinion, the queen who had the worst runway of the week still won the Maxi Challenge. And yes, these queens may have had bad fashion, but they're still great queens, so don't send them any hate. And stay tuned for more stuff here on Wild Spear.